Let us continue now the adventures of Anthony. We have just seen him pass successfully through several temptations, and we notice here a certain crescendo of intensity in his combat with the demons. There are other ways of conceptualizing the spiritual journey. This was the way that was popular at the time of St. Athanasius, who wrote the Life of Anthony. Hence, this is the background that we're using. Before we move to his third temptation, which is a kind of face-to-face encounter with the powers of evil personified in the demon, Satan, let me just point out once again what the night of sense had effected in Anthony's interior life. It had brought him to the freedom from the domination of his feelings and emotions. This doesn't mean that he achieved this by way of suppression or repression, but rather by way of integration. Because now his self-centered desires and programs for happiness that couldn't possibly work with the emotional investment that he had in them had been gradually laid to rest. And perhaps here the best analogy would be to say that the night of sense changes the addictions, that is, the compulsive character of the energy centers, into preferences. So that there is no longer the feeling that I must have this to be happy, hence the frustration no longer exists. There is a preference. It'd be nice if this happened. I wish this would happen. But if it doesn't happen, no sweat, no skin off your teeth, a little disappointment, but you forget it at once and go on to the next thing. The character of compulsion is you don't forget it, you can't forget it, it galls you, it leaves you in a turmoil with a pot boiling in your interior someplace, and it drives you up the wall, and usually those who live with you, along with you. So here is a little examination of conscience for you when you find difficulty in centering prayer and feel bombarded with thoughts or attracted to certain thoughts or unable to let certain feelings go by. And so ask yourself maybe these three questions when you feel upset and can't remain calm in the periods of centering prayer and contemplation. Ask yourself, do I want to feel something? Do I want to control something? And finally, do I want to know something with the security of certitude? It's always one of those three things that has got you. And if you can spot it and let it go, then you'll find that things will calm down and be a little more peaceful. Because the night of sense has brought you to the point where you perceive that the ultimate source of all the energy centers is the selfish desire for security, affection, esteem, control, and power. And so by, once again, with the help of grace, letting go of that inclination, you begin to move more and more into a certain attitude and permanent disposition of peace, which persists along with thoughts and upsetting emotions, but these become less and less capable of getting to you or stirring up anything like a prolonged emotional binge. So now let us see what happened to Anthony. As he emerged from the night of sense, he entered into a plateau where he seems to have experienced a certain expansion of freedom as the result of being liberated from the false self-sense, at least as an addiction. And so he now intensified and stabilized his practice of asceticism, his practice of spiritual discipline, and he was cautious. He knew that the demons were not resting just because they were bothering him for the moment, and he was aware that they were just plotting new strategies against him. So accordingly, he didn't presume on any progress that he made, and he took the resolution to begin anew every day, as if he hadn't even started yet. So every day he started over. He was not someone to rest on their laurels or to look for some kind of prize for their abilities or conduct. He was really on the journey, and someone who is on the journey has their pack to carry, and is looking for a camping site. They're intent upon all that's involved in a journey if it's going to be successful. Now, Ken Wilber has a marvelous distinction that might be useful here, and it is the distinction between what he calls translation and transformation. Whenever we move to any new level of consciousness because of the forces of nature or biological, or sometimes the opposition we experience, the stress sometimes pushes us into the next level. And the higher up the level or the ladder of consciousness, the more these periods of struggle move us to new levels of integration and unity. Now, when one reaches a new level of consciousness, then one has to take time to translate into this new level of consciousness all our relationships with God, ourselves, other people, reality. And this may take some years. And when it's all worked through our body, mind, and spirit, then once again, the food, the spiritual food, begins to become insipid. It no longer nourishes. One's in a crisis of faith once again, and then one takes the leap into the next level of consciousness, and that's what transformation is. It's the moment of a new insight. But that doesn't mean that you're established there completely, but rather you must now go through the translating period once again at this new level of integrating all one's relationships now into this new level. And this keeps repeating. Each level of consciousness progressing or opening out step by step. Well, here Anthony had made the immense leap out of the childishness of the false self-system. It had been laid to rest. He no longer is under the domination of any of his feelings or emotions. And with this new freedom, his creativity and energy, of course, is greatly increased. Most of our energy is dissipated working through or putting up with the frustrations and the upsetting or afflictive emotions that proceed when our energy centers are opposed or frustrated. So if we had passed through the night of sense, that problem would no longer exist. So obviously there's more energy to use for more useful things, such as loving the people you live with and doing good to those beyond the immediate family. So the scope of one's capacity to love is now increased as the freedom from our own melodrama begins to be laid to rest. So Anthony then has come to a certain plateau. It doesn't always follow this regime, because God doesn't seem to feel himself bound to follow computerized programs, even in the spiritual life. So sometimes the night of sense begins at once, and sometimes they're even reversed, so there's no way of being absolutely sure. The only thing you can be absolutely sure of in the spiritual journey is that whatever you're expecting to happen will not happen. So if you are expecting, and have read a lot of spiritual books, that the things are going to proceed according to those books, then he'll reverse the order for your benefit. You've got to take the leap into the unknown. As long as you're secure in your strategy, plans and things are going according to Hoyle, you're really playing Ring Around the Rosie. And so you're not getting anywhere. Well, now, let's see what happened. Anthony has made the transformation. Now he's in the period of translation, which is a kind of plateau, and he's completing that, and he feels within himself a new call to set out into the unknown, a new invitation to make a quantum leap in the spiritual journey. And this is called, in John of the Cross's terms, the night of sense. It takes many forms. It can be the piling up of exterior trials, as in the case of Job in the Bible. It can be the humiliation of deep interior purification. It can be opposition from other sources. And above all, it is the increasing light on our own capacity for any evil. Oddly enough, as you make headway in the spiritual journey up to transforming union, you become more and more aware of your innate capacity for any evil whatsoever. And so the spiritual journey is not a success story, as I said, but it's a series of deepening humiliations until humility itself has become a joy. Humiliation leads to humility in St. Bernard's teaching. And so the interior external trials that reduce us in our own estimation are not really enemies. Unfortunately, of course, if one has a low self-image, there's a confusion sometimes between humility and that neurotic tendency to put oneself down. That's not what we're talking about. So sometimes the language of humility can be greatly misunderstood. We're speaking here of the actual awareness, because of the growing light that is penetrating our minds and hearts, the realization that without God's help and protection and love, we would be capable of any sin. Okay? That indicates you're getting close to divine union. Well, anyway, we'll speak about that a little later after we see how Anthony got through this. If he gets through it, I'm not guaranteeing it. Anyway, we get this simple phrase, Anthony then left for the tombs which lay at some distance from the village. Now, if you were a person of the 4th century reading that book, your ears would go straight up. My God, he's going to the tombs. Now, the tombs are the front lines of the demons. In the mentality or cultural context of his period, no one ever stayed in the tombs longer than laying a body on a shelf or burying it or whatever, usually laying it in a tomb. That was because in the popular imagination, ruins or the desert or tombs were the stronghold of demons. Hence, if you went there, you were really asking for trouble. So here is what Anthony is really doing. This one little sentence, includes perhaps a whole year or two of trying to discern whether he should just stay where he was or whether he should take his battle with the demons into their territory. Now, you don't think about that when you're in a defensive pose. In other words, this is the moment that Anthony, under the inspiration of grace, takes an aggressive move, and he attacks the demons on their own ground. That's the meaning of going to the tombs. And it's the symbol of this tremendous courage. Now, Anthony, in his early life, we saw, was kind of a withdrawn young man, so he was a bit timid, perhaps by temperament. And so he may have realized that there was still some residue of timidity in his character, and he felt inspired by God to do something that would confront it and eradicate it. Now, the difference between Anthony and some starry-eyed ascetic or seeker in our time is that this was an inspiration of grace Now, some people take upon themselves, because they've read about it, and they want to imitate those who are very advanced in the spiritual life before they've even taken their first step in the journey. They want to be perfect at once, and so they take on difficulties, penances or trials or ministries that are way beyond their capacities. And I'm sure God admires that, but they may fall on their nose. You can't expect him to protect people who are doing their own thing, okay? Because the spiritual journey consists in doing God's thing, okay? So here is Anthony then, inspired and consenting to the inspiration, as we saw, is the way that the gospel and the epistles recommend that we proceed. Not what we do and let God applaud, but God inspires us what to do, and we consent and cooperate and carry it out. That's the cycle that we have to get in. Well, anyway, here is Anthony marching off to it, single-handed, without any support, into the tombs, and he has a friend come and lock him in. Notice that detail. Perhaps he was aware of his capacity to get scared and run away, so he wanted to be sure this was going to be a fight to the finish. This guy's courage is just incredible. Well, it even surprised the demons. They couldn't believe it. What is he doing here? How dare he come into our stronghold? Let's get rid of him. So he called all his cohorts, as the book said, and they gathered around and they beat Anthony into a semi-consciousness. And he said afterwards that no human force could have beaten him up so much. So he was lying there unconscious in the tombs, locked in, and along came his friend, by divine providence, of course, to bring him some bread, which they had agreed to do at a certain interval. And he saw Anthony on the floor, unconscious, and he picked him up and lovingly carried him back to the church and laid him on the floor and called his friends and relatives. And so we get this marvelous image. It really has to be produced in some media someday. But here is our hero lying there in a kind of catafalque with candles all around, and his relatives and friends kind of mourning him. They don't know what to do. And towards midnight, they all start to doze. And just at this moment, Anthony finally awakes, and he looks around, and he sees they're all nodding. Now, the question must have risen in his mind, what is the Spirit saying to me now? Is he saying, well, you've done enough, call an ambulance and get to the hospital and wipe off the blood? Or was he saying, Anthony, you've started this thing, this is the moment to bring it to an end. I'll be with you. Go back there. Well, this is the double bind that we sometimes get in. Shall I do it? Shall I not? Is it coming from God? Is it or someplace else? Well, anyway, this again was divine inspiration, and he was determined, I guess he'd really figured it out in advance, to follow this thing to the end. So he beckoned to his friend, who was also awake, to come over, and he asked him to take him back to the tombs. And so very quietly his friend lifted him up so no one would wake, because they would probably have opposed this. And once again he carried him back, laid him on the floor in the dust of this tomb, once again locked the door behind him and departed. Well, you wonder what kind of a friend this was. But he was under instructions from Anthony, I guess. And because of the blows, Anthony was too feeble to stand up, so he prayed lying down. And having finished his prayer, he then boldly challenged the demons to do anything about it. And here was his statement. Here I am, he said, shouting, Anthony, I am not cowed by your blows. And even though you should give me more, nothing shall separate me from the love of Christ. A quotation from Paul in his great trials. Then he began to sing. And he, of course, from the Psalms, which was the great custom, if camps of enemies stand against me, my heart shall not fear. Notice? That's his project, to eliminate the last traces of fear in his heart, so that he may be completely free to follow the most heroic suggestions of the Spirit. I'll quote now from Athanasius, since it's so exciting. Hold on to your seats, please. So thought and spoke the ascetic. But the hater of good, the demon, marveled that after all the blows he had the courage to come back. Even the demons couldn't believe it, that he would still come back, and had to acknowledge his courage. But that, of course, they were not especially edified by that. They just had to think up some better strategies. So he called together his dogs, a favorite nickname for the demons among the desert fathers, and bursting with rage said, "You see that we have not stopped this fellow, neither by the spirit of fornication or by blows. On the contrary, he even challenges us. What an affront, it's just unbearable. Let us go after him in another way." Well, that night they made such a din that the place seemed to be shaken by an earthquake. Have you ever been in an earthquake? It's terrifying. You don't know whether the ground is going to open up or the building on top of you. Well, that was just to frighten Anthony some more. It was as though the demons were breaking through the four walls of the little chamber and bursting through them in the forms of beasts and reptiles, all the most terrifying of the animals. All at once the place was filled with the phantoms. Again, it's just a stage production of lions, bears, leopards, bulls, serpents, asps, scorpions, wolves, and each moved according to the shape it had assumed. The lion roared. Don't be scared, it's just me. Ready to spring upon him. The bull appeared about to gore him through. The serpent writhed, ready to strike him. And the noises emitted simultaneously by all the apparitions were frightful, and the fury shown was fierce. Anthony, pummeled and goaded, felt even severer pain in his body, yet he lay there, fearless. Aha, now he has achieved his purpose. He's passed beyond all domination of the emotions, beyond even preferences, into total freedom, though he hasn't had time to experience it yet. But he was all the more alert in spirit. He groaned, it is true, a concession to nature, because of the pain that racked his body, but his mind was master of the situation. And to mock them, he said, "If you had any power in you, it would have been enough for you for just one of you to come." Good reasoning. You're just trying to scare me out of my wits, and I'm not frightened. If you can, he said, and have received power against me, up and at me. If you cannot, why excite yourselves to no purpose? So he really gave it to him there. And so after many ruses, the demons gnashed their teeth against him, because they were only fooling themselves and not him. And here again, the Lord was not forgetful of Anthony's struggle, but came to help him. For he looked up, and he saw, as it were, the roof opening, and a beam of light coming down to him. The demons suddenly were gone, the pain in his body ceased at once, and the building was restored to its former condition. Anthony, perceiving that help had come, breathed more freely. And he asked the vision, the eternal human question in these circumstances: where were you? Where were you? Why did you not appear at the beginning to stop my pains? Good question. Why couldn't the Lord have come sooner and not left him there to be beaten up? And a voice came to him, "Anthony, I was right here, but I waited to see you in action. And now, because you held out and did not surrender, I will always be your helper and I will make you renowned everywhere. Shades of the great promises to Abraham after he came through his great trial of obedience to God when he was asked to sacrifice his youngest son. Hearing this, Anthony arose and prayed. He was so strengthened that he felt his body more vigorous than before. The energy of the transforming union is now flowing into him. He was at this time about 35 years of age.